Hello there, lovely people. It's Alex from Nintendo Life here, and I'm not alone. I'm here with Mr. Jiminy Jim John from Nintendo Life as well. Say hello, John from Nintendo Life.
Hello, I'm Jiminy Jim John from Nintendo Life.
Yeah, today we're going to be having a little bit of a chatette, if you like, about Nintendo and where they sit when it comes to the next gen, because the next gen is on the way. Pre-orders are already up for the PS5 and the Xbox One, Series X and Series S, and that's still going to be confusing to say out loud. Where does Nintendo sit with all this? John?
That's a good question. I mean, I think Nintendo have always sort of sat in their own little bubble. They're always kind of competing on their own. And what's interesting about this is, I suppose they've been in their own generation for a few years now. Wii U ended far before PS4 and Xbox One, and the Wii U came along far before the PS3 and Xbox 360 ended. So Nintendo are currently about to enter their fourth year of the Switch, whereas Xbox Series X and PS5 are starting their first year. So right off the bat, they're kind of in a very different position to those consoles.
It is, and I think the idea of having ports, certainly, that go over, sort of over all the three systems. I know it's not just three, because you got S and Xbox One is still being... Okay, we'll just say ecosystems. Three ecosystems is going to be significantly reduced, certainly for AAA games. You will have certainly indies, I'm sure, that will go across the multiple different ecosystems, but I genuinely think for AAAs, there will probably be a few, but I think it's definitely going to be difficult for developers to be able to include the Switch in that if it's games designed for the newer systems.
Yeah, it definitely will. I do question how much that really matters, though. Like we know right now, Monster Hunter Rise is going to be a Switch exclusive, and it's coming in around 5 months from now. We have Nintendo games. Animal Crossing New Horizons sold over 20 million units. It's probably far beyond that now.
God, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we were closer to 30 at this point.
And that hasn't had a Christmas yet either.
No!
So this game is potentially going to blow up again this holiday season. And Nintendo are fine. They have a lot of third parties that do support them, but they don't necessarily need all those big AAA games that PS5 and Series X will be getting.
I do think it's nice, though, certainly with things like Doom coming over from, Doom 2016, not the original Doom. I mean, that's still nice as well, but Doom 2016, that was lovely, really nice, a really, really good inclusion. But I just don't see how they're going to be able to do it. I mean, don't get me wrong, I would absolutely adore to be proven wrong and for Panic Button or one of these other major porting companies to turn around and say we're bringing the enhanced version of Cyberpunk 2077 over to the Nintendo Switch. Would blow my mind, but I just don't think it's feasible. However, I do think that there are a couple of things that Nintendo could do to be a little bit more competitive, should they wish. The most obvious being an upgraded Switch, or indeed a new Switch entirely, a Switch 2, but I mean, the idea of an upgraded Switch, I don't think that's that outlandish, do you?
Not at all. And there's actually something quite suspicious about March 26th. We know Balan Wonderworld and also Monster Hunter Rise are coming out on the exact same day. And it's got a few people turning their heads. Like, could that be a day of a launch of a new console? So if you look back to New 3DS, that launched the exact same day as Majora's Mask 3D and Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate. So could this potentially be the landing of a Switch upgrade?
Well, I do think that Balan Wonderworld is the type of game that can only run on a more powerful system. That sounds rude. I'm being condescending, but no, it does actually look like a genuinely interesting game, but not one that I think necessarily dictates bigger, better hardware. But the alternative to a more sort of like a Switch Pro or something, which I think is very likely given that it is, in essence, a handheld, and we've had exactly the same thing happen in the form of the new 3DS and the DSi. But I also think that a straight-up just brand new console, the Switch 2 or the Nintendo Switch U, which is probably what they'll call it. Please don't call it that, Nintendo. I think that's also a possibility. But maybe less so.
Yeah, I mean, a Switch currently it's scheduled to perform extremely well. It's already performing really well. We're at over 50 million units, and analysts think it could overtake 100 million units by the end of its life cycle. Maybe even higher than that. And the one thing, if they do a Pro, they still can't abandon that user base which already have 50 million Switches in the wild. So I do wonder, is a Pro going to change all that much about how games are developed, or is it just going to make certain games more playable if you have a Pro?
Well, I think the most likely solution is going to be the same thing as like the new 3DS. Every 3DS game works on the new 3DS. Some of them run a little bit better. Like Smash, you could actually use the home screen. Crazy. But then there will be exclusives like on the new 3DS had... How many? Was it like 2 or 3 exclusives?
It had Xenoblade Chronicles 3D, and I think Hyrule Warriors Legends did run on both, but it ran dreadfully on original 3DS, so I kind of count that as exclusive.
No. Fire Emblem Warriors was a new 3DS exclusive. I suppose you could see, if Nintendo weren't necessarily to go down an upgraded route just yet, you could also look at maybe something like the Switch sort of being not so much presented, but seen as a sort of a companion console. You don't just... Well, some people will, obviously, but in terms of the greater populace, for people who really enjoy their gaming, they have a home console and they have a Switch.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the way it's always been with handhelds, I guess. And if you see the Switch as a handheld, that's just kind of filling that bill there. Like, I knew when I was a kid, so many people had a PS2 and a Game Boy Advance, or even like a Wii and a DS, or whatever kind of combination that you can fit in there. And Switch definitely has the potential to be that, especially with Switch Lite, which is currently going to be the cheapest console on the market.
I'm not saying that we should, in this discussion, discount the Switch Lite, but just for the sake of argument, if you do discount the Switch Lite, the Xbox Series S is cheaper than a Switch by £30 in the UK. I'm not quite sure what it is in the US. Do you happen to know, John?
I'm pretty sure it matches the Switch. I think they're both $300 in the US.
Oh, wow. Oh, yeah, because we get screwed over in multiple ways, don't we?
We do. But it definitely brings up some questions about like value and what people are going to go for. Because Series S or just the Xbox ecosystem as a whole seems to be targeting value right now. Game Pass, for instance, is such a no-brainer service. If you have an Xbox, I don't really see why you wouldn't have Game Pass. There's just so many games on there. And it's just growing and growing. Like EA Play is going to be part of Game Pass. And Bethesda is coming to Game Pass. So would you rather go for a machine that's cheaper than a Switch with Game Pass, or would you go for a Switch which is more expensive and you've got to buy every game? I think that's kind of something a lot of consumers have to start asking themselves about the next gen.
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing will be, how do you intend to play? If you're going to play primarily on the TV, a Switch in this context of the Xbox Series S, unless you're big into Nintendo games, which I think you should be, but not everyone is, we can't hide from that fact. I think, the Switch starts to lose a bit of its luster if you're just going to use it on the TV. Unless you're really into those games, and at the end of the day, it is the games that it's the games that we play, but even so, if you plan to play third-party games, AAA titles that may not even come to the Switch, the Xbox Series S is a very tantalizing offer. And the fact that it's cheaper, it's digital only, but most people I don't think really care about that. And I've just set the comments off, haven't I?
Yeah, especially with Game Pass, I think. I think on PS5, physical's probably more of a robust thing, but on Xbox, I think the future is kind of Game Pass. But one point about price too is next-gen games are going to be £70, which is around a £20 price increase. Some games already go for £60, but not very many. And I've also got to wonder, is Nintendo going to follow? Because personally, I don't think they will. I think a lot of Nintendo games will probably stay around £50 kind of mark, which does give them an advantage. Like, if Nintendo games are considerably cheaper than the competing consoles, that looks pretty alluring.
It does, especially if we're talking about the physical media, because there's so many people that will be, sort of going all digital, which is absolutely fine, and a lot of people, I think they just don't care, they just want the games. But for the people that want physical media, the Series X and just consoles as a whole, for physical media, the Switch is still leading pretty solidly. I think there are generally more, I hate to use the term, special versions of physical games, certainly of smaller indie games with things like Limited Run and super rare games. There is definitely a niche market for that, and I think it's really being cornered by, for the Switch. Absolutely. If you want a physical version of Hollow Knight, you can get it on other systems, but why? This is another thing. Why would you play an indie game on a PS4 or an Xbox One when it plays exactly just as well on a Switch that you can also take on the go? So you can take it on the train, you can take it on a plane, you can take it on an automobile if you want a reference to an 80s film. Or was it 90s? It doesn't matter, Alex. It doesn't matter. Move on. But
That's a grander point as a whole, I think, is games. Nintendo have a great lineup coming up. We've sort of talked a bit about it earlier, but Monster Hunter Rise is coming up. Breath of the Wild 2 is kind of likely for next year. I suppose we'll see. But I think we're going to start seeing a lot of games that are held back for this year because of the events of the world will probably start to launch next year. Games like Bravely Default 2 will likely slip into next year. No More Heroes 3, likely next year.
Oh, it has been confirmed for next year, in fact.
Right, yeah, that's already been confirmed, right. So it looks like Nintendo's lineup is going to be very compelling for 2021. And if a new console is launching next year, there's even potential that they could be doing sequels to a lot of the 2017 games to kind of try and recapture that flame. We're already seeing that at Breath of the Wild 2, but perhaps Odyssey 2 could come along. Ubisoft Milan, I think, did Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle. What are they doing now? There's a lot of potential for sequels coming up, and their lineup as a whole could be really promising next year.
And I think Nintendo has always used older tech very well indeed. Certainly when it comes to their handhelds. You could argue that until the Wii, they were trying to push power on things like the GameCube and the N64, and certainly the SNES and things like that, but certainly from the Wii onwards, they haven't really made power their focus. They've made fun their focus, and that has, caused a bit of a change, and they seem to be using older technology in more sort of interesting and exciting ways. And now that they've had even more time with the Switch, they've learned even more about their own architecture. I think we could be seeing some real upgrades as well. Like, I don't want to sort of get too excited, but Breath of the Wild 2, I think it's going to have all of the issues with the original, with things like frame rate drops in Korok Forest. I'm sure they know more now, and the fact that they're not tied to the Wii U as well means that I think we're going to be seeing even more exciting and even more impressive games out of Nintendo that could absolutely compete in terms of pure fun factor with games on the Series X and the PS5, even if the games aren't at 4K at 120 Hz.
And Nintendo loves to get weird with their games too, and a lot of this comes down to the tech that's already in the Switch. Like Ring Fit Adventure, you wouldn't see that on another console, and a big part of that is because of how the Joy-Con works too. Mario Kart Live is another one, Labo is another one. Switch is capable of a lot, especially with its IR sensor, which it seemingly doesn't get used very often, but when it does get used, the results are... they feel near infinite. Like, Labo could do anything with that IR camera.
I loved Labo in its own way. I mean, it didn't stick around in my head for very long, but the time that I used Labo, it was magical. It was a toy. It was like a proper toy. It was like being a child again.
Yeah, for sure. And like Nintendo's controllers as well, they always get really ambitious, and the Joy-Con and Pro Controller have so much tech crammed in there. And you look at Xbox Series X, which is kind of just using Xbox One with a share button, and not much is new. The DualSense is doing a bit more, but it feels like Nintendo can just sort of do whatever they want with their games because their controllers are so versatile. And I'm really interested in seeing what the next kind of Ring Fit Adventure game's gonna be like. We had Brain Training earlier this year, which had, I think it was IR finger reading. You'd have like these sums, you hold up some fingers to answer the questions. And it works. It works remarkably well. So I can't wait to see what other kind of weird stuff they're going to do with not only their future tech, but the existing tech too.
I really hope they do some more really wild stuff with it. I wouldn't necessarily want it to be at the detriment of the games, but, certainly if they can get something really solid out of it, then, yeah, that's hugely exciting. And I think Nintendo... I don't want to blow too much smoke in any particular direction, but I do think Nintendo does it better than anyone else, on the whole. I think they bloody pioneered motion controls and motion aiming, even though I think the DualShock 4 definitely supported it. But yeah, the 6-axis supported it. So Sony did it first, the idea of having, motion control in a standard controller. But Nintendo has now popularized it, and we're now starting to see motion aiming in PlayStation games as well now, aren't we? As of, well, in sort of a mainline sense, as of only the past couple of months.
Yeah, both Days Gone and The Last of Us Part 2 got gyro updates. It kind of feels like they're sort of pioneering that field there. And it's weird when a Switch game doesn't have gyro aiming. People lose their minds when that happens.
Yeah, I mean, I'm one of them.
Yes, I mean, same. I love gyro. It feels weird to play a shooter without it. If you've ever tried sniping with gyro, it is so natural. I suck at sniping in any shooter with analog sticks, but in Splatoon, it's so easy just to move the controller a bit and just make these like very fine refinements. That's what gyro is great for.
But another big thing about these new systems that lots of people are, touting on Twitter is the fact that these games are going to be 4K with the PS5 4K to a degree, and some of them supporting 120 hertz. And I've seen some people rumoring about how, a supposed Switch Pro or some form of upgraded Switch is going to be 4K. I think it's rubbish, frankly. I don't think there's nearly enough support, want for 4K out there. I don't think nobody really watches anything in 4K. I think quite a few people do game in 4K, certainly enthusiasts. But for the wider population, I don't think most of those people really care.
Yeah, I mean, I did a Twitter poll recently asking who has a 4K TV, and I think it was 30% of people do. So 70% of people who answered that poll don't, which is a pretty considerable amount. And yeah, 4K I think is a lot more natural. 120 FPS though, how many people have 120 Hz displays? It's a cool feature. I just don't know how much mileage people are going to get out of that. As for whether a Switch could even be capable of that, that's another question. And I guess it depends what kind of form factor it takes. If it's going to be like another regular Switch, then it's still going to be battery powered. It's still going to have certain coolings to take into account. But if it were to be like a docked-only Switch, kind of like a PlayStation TV, which is what the Vita had, then there's potential to remove the battery entirely and maybe focus a bit more on power.
But then I think you're starting to fragment the audience even more, which I don't think Nintendo wants to do. I mean, for the longest time, the idea of the Switch Lite was seen as, oh, why would Nintendo do that? It wouldn't be a Switch, and I've seen people, even these days, saying the Switch Lite isn't a Switch because it doesn't switch. So I mean, at the end of the day, obviously, what you read in comments and what actually goes on in the world they're not the same thing. But I think Nintendo potentially fragmenting things further is, I don't see it personally. I think they're very much, if they go down that route, then they're going to be directly competing with the X, with the S, with the PS5. And I think I genuinely don't think that's the way that they will go or the way that they want to go, to be honest. I think, sort of 4K 120 hertz, it would be lovely to have. I'm not saying I wouldn't take a 4K, 120 hertz Breath of the Wild, far from it. I would grab it with both hands, but I just don't think it's practical. You wouldn't be able to create a machine like that and have it portable with good battery life, good cooling, reliability, and it doesn't, doesn't break if you drop it. It's just not practical. And I think that's another reason why Nintendo is sticking to the older hardware, because it's more resilient, more reliable, it's more refined.
Cheaper, too. I mean,
cheaper, yeah.
Switch is essentially a tablet. It's a mobile device. Compared to like the actual next-gen consoles, they're going for cutting-edge components. Switch isn't aiming for that. And that's okay. It's okay they're going for something different, and it kind of makes the competition more interesting too.
Yeah, it's just an entirely different beast, and I think it makes it more fun, and again, it distinguishes itself as, being outside of the other competition, which I think that's what Nintendo wants, honestly. I could be wrong, but, at the end of the day, I'm not Nintendo, but I've been in this game for a while, and that's what I think they're up to.
I don't really feel like they'll succeed in just replicating what the next-gen consoles are doing. Because people go for Nintendo for the Nintendo experience, for the Nintendo games, for their own form factor. If they were to just give you a Series X but have a Nintendo exclusives, I'm not entirely sure if that would be the best move for them.
I'm sure I probably could put it into words if I could be bothered, but I can't. It feels very un-Nintendo. But who knows, at the end of the day, we could we could be looking at Nintendo, Series X next year. I sincerely doubt it, but anything could happen. I think realistically, my prediction for, how Nintendo is going to cope is it's just going to kind of stay out of it.
I kind of agree with you. I mean, they've been doing their own thing for a long time. It's been working for them. They've been doing it since the Switch first came out. They've been doing it since the Wii U, or even the Wii, really. and it's never not worked for them. And the Switch, if anything, is doing better than
Did you just
ever.
say that the Wii U didn't not work?
I mean, it's doing its own thing at the very least. You've got to admire that. But I think I read that the Switch is up, like, it's doubled its performance from last year in terms of sales. So Switch momentum is not going down, whereas the Wii was. Like, when the Wii was getting a bit older on, momentum fell, it dropped down. But Switch seemingly is just rocking up, and nothing's really stopping it. And I don't really think the next gen's going to affect that. Because it's almost like a different audience, or double dippers are going in for the Switch. No one's really like choosing this as an alternative. It's more of just, hey, this is also something I could have alongside my consoles. So yeah, I don't really think this is going to affect that much.
Well, I suppose you could look at it in the way of people have laptops and things like that. People will buy a laptop for numerous things, you know, to do computing, do work, or, you know, go on the internet, do whatever they want. Those people don't not buy phones, even though they could, in theory, do everything on, you know, you'd be fine with a phone, but it's different situations call for different devices. It's horses for courses. Okay, well, I think that about wraps it up, unless you've got anything else you'd like to give your input in on.
I think that's really about it. Switch could have Breath of the Wild 2. PS5 and Xbox Series X aren't going to have Breath of the Wild 2.
That's about all that matters in my view. But what do you think? Let us know what you think about Nintendo and how it's going to battle and survive in the next generation by leaving a comment down below. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, then why don't you ruminate about that subscribe button and the other subscribe buttons that may be competing for your attention, and be sure to check out nintendolife.com for all sorts of lovely Nintendo-related content. Thank you again for watching. Bye-bye.
Bye.